I watched the hiker's clip at 9:17 p.m. on Captain Vance's phone, standing in the records room like I was about to get written up instead of sent out. I was 20 minutes from clocking out. My belt was unhooked on one side, my shirt wasn't sitting right, and my brain was already halfway home. I'd been running the usual calls since noon, the kind that leave you tired but not proud. Traffic stops. A domestic that cooled down before it boiled over. Paperwork. Marla didn't waste time. She'd had my sergeant pull me off the floor and told dispatch to hold non-emergency walk-ins for a minute. When I stepped into records, she shut the door and handed me the phone without a greeting. The room was colder than the rest of the station, air-conditioned like the file cabinets mattered more than people. It smelled like toner and disinfectant. Metal shelves lined the walls, binders by year, labels fading at the edges. The clip was vertical, shaky, lit by a flashlight that bounced across wet timber. Whoever filmed it was moving fast. I could hear breathing and a nervous laugh. The beam swung through ferns and slick bark, then dipped hard like the person holding the phone had slipped. For a second, the screen was blur and black. Then the light came up and froze. A patrol unit sat down in a ditch at a bad angle, tilted and half swallowed. Rust had crawled out from seams and door edges in thick orange veins. Moss clung to the lower panels and wheel wells. Vines threaded the push bar and grill like somebody had tied them on and walked away. The light bar was cloudy, plastic gone dull with age. The tires looked soft and sunken, rims pressed into mud like the ground had slowly accepted the weight and decided it wasn't giving it back. The flashlight jittered across the driver's door, and I caught the lettering. Sheriff, faded and broken, peeling where the paint had given up. That was the moment my brain stopped treating it like a random abandoned car. My posture changed without me noticing. Badge brain. Evidence brain. I'd only been in this county a few months. New patch, new radio codes, new faces in the break room. But I'd heard the story, because everyone had. A deputy went out on a call-up in the timber and never came back. The search ran until the overtime money dried up. The case got a name people stopped saying out loud. I didn't know the details. I just knew the empty look that crossed older deputies' faces when it came up. The beam drifted to the windshield. The glass was grimy, streaked with old rain and sap. Then the light hit the inside surface, and the person filming stopped moving. A handprint was pressed flat against the inside of the windshield, palm and fingers spread. It wasn't a smear. It wasn't mud. It was clean skin oil, like someone had planted their hand there and held it. The print sat at driver height, angled like the person had leaned forward and braced. Marla rewound it and played the same 2 seconds again. The print was still there. The unit was still there. The ditch and vines made sense. That handprint didn't. It made the whole thing feel recent in a way my mind didn't want to accept. "That's the clip," Marla said quietly. "That's a patrol unit," I said, staring at the screen. She paused on the frame where the door lettering was clearest and let me stare at it. If this was real, it was a county asset sitting in the woods. If it was fake, someone had staged county markings deep enough to make a point. Either way, it was going to become a story, and stories spread faster than we can clean up. It was logged as recovered 8 years ago, Marla told me. 8 years was long enough for rust and vines. It wasn't long enough for a clean handprint to look fresh. My head reached for easy answers. Kids, hunters, someone trying to scare tourists. Then I looked at the angle of the hand, the placement, the way it sat where a driver would brace themselves. It didn't look like a joke. It looked like a person inside, pushing out. "So why's it back?" My voice came out flat. Marla didn't give me a speech. She had the clip and she had a file that said the unit was accounted for, and now those two things didn't match. If the clip leaked, it would feed every true crime account that still chewed on the missing deputy case. If it stayed quiet, we still had something in the trees we didn't control. She slid a thin working packet across the table, not the full binder, just copies, and an assignment sheet. The plan was simple. I'd go in with a liaison who knew the forest roads and the spur lines better than our maps did. I'd confirm the coordinates from the hiker's clip, mark a safe route, and take wide photos that showed position and surroundings. No touching, no recovery attempt. The vehicle team would come in daylight and do the physical work. Marla flipped the packet open to the first page. The header was bold, the language tight, like it had been rewritten after someone sued. 5 short rules sat under it, each one blunt, each one aimed at stopping a specific mistake. My eyes went straight to the line about identifiers, and my throat tightened. "Before you step into the woods, you sign the addendum," she said. Marla didn't hand me the addendum like it was optional reading. She held it flat on the table and kept a finger on the corner, like it might try to slide away if she let go. I could see the file underneath it, thicker than I expected. This wasn't a single missing person report with a dusty case number. It was years of paper stacked into a spine. The kind of file that starts clean and then gets messy from too many hands touching it and not enough answers coming back. She opened the binder and let me see the first few pages before she even said anything. Scene photos in plastic sleeves, a county road sign half buried in ferns, a boot print in soft ground with a ruler beside it, a flashlight beam caught in someone's phone camera from a search line, faces of deputies and volunteers in high-vis vests, all of them looking tired in different ways. Then, the timeline pages, dates and times marching down in neat rows, dispatch logs, call-out rosters, air support requests, a section labeled Subject Vehicle with a grainy photo of a patrol unit on a flatbed, tagged and strapped, a paper evidence seal taped to the door. If that picture was real, the unit had been recovered. If it wasn't, then someone had gone through the trouble of building a lie that lived in our own paperwork. Either option made my skin crawl, because paperwork is supposed to be the one thing you can trust. Marla turned to a tab that read, Property Recovery in block letters. Under it were forms with signatures, box checks, chain of custody lines, and one paragraph of legal language that sounded like it had been written by a person who never set foot in the woods. I saw dates from 8 years ago. I saw names. I didn't recognize them. The ink looked old, the kind that fades into the page like it's becoming part of it. Then she pulled the addendum out clean. 1 page, department letterhead, a case number printed in the corner. 5 short lines labeled 1 through 5, each one the kind of instruction you'd give a rookie before they make a mistake that follows them forever. The formatting was exact. No slang, no drama. Just blunt directives and a signature block at the bottom with a line for name, badge, date, and time. "It's an officer safety addendum," Marla said, tapping the page. Her nail hit the paper twice, sharp little sounds in the quiet room. The air conditioner hummed behind us. Somewhere out in the main hall, a printer ran for a few seconds and stopped. It felt like the building was trying not to listen. "This isn't standard," I said, keeping my eyes on the lines. "Rule 1 told me not to broadcast identifiers while the unit was in sight. No plates, no unit number, no names. That went against everything I'd been trained to do. You call it in. You confirm it. You start a record. That's how you protect yourself. That's how you make sure the next person knows where you are if your radio goes quiet. It's how you keep the story straight later." Rule 2 was about lights. No flashing, no strobe, no hazards. Keep it steady. Keep it low. That one felt odd, but not impossible. Rule 3 told me where to stand and where not to look. Don't line up behind the vehicle. Don't look into the mirror. Keep your angle off the passenger side. It was specific enough to make my stomach tighten. Rule 4 was the one that made my jaw clench. No trunk, no door handles, no stepping inside a 3-step radius around the unit. That was a crime scene instruction without a crime scene label, and it had the weight of a hard lesson behind it, like somebody had learned it the expensive way and wrote it down afterward so they wouldn't have to say it out loud again. Rule 5 was about evidence handling, and that at least lived in my world. If you find department property, bag it, seal it, leave. Don't count it there. Don't take close photos. Don't turn it into a moment. Get out. Neither is that unit sitting out there, she snapped. Marla's tone didn't leave room for debate. She wasn't scared, at least not in a way she'd show. She was focused, like she'd already run the arguments in her head and cut them off at the knees. This wasn't a training conversation. This was a boundary. The door behind me creaked and I glanced over. Caleb Stroud stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, like he'd been there longer than I'd noticed. He was older than me by a decade, maybe more. Built like he'd been lifting the same county weight set since high school. He had that look deputies get when they've seen enough weird stuff to stop joking about it. He didn't step into the room. He didn't meet my eyes. He looked at the open file, and then at the paused screen on Marla's phone, still showing the rusted unit tilted in the ditch. "Don't stand behind it," Caleb muttered from the doorway. It wasn't advice dressed up as a story. It was just a warning. Like, don't touch a downed line. Don't put your hand where you can't see. Don't turn your back on a corner you haven't cleared. Simple, flat, too late to be casual. "That's enough, Caleb," Marla barked. Caleb didn't argue. He lifted one hand, palm out in a small surrender, and backed away from the frame of the door. He wasn't embarrassed. He looked frustrated, like he'd said more than he was allowed to, and hated that he couldn't say the rest. Marla slid the addendum closer to me and set a pen beside it. The pen was one of the cheap department ones with the sheriff's star printed on the side. It made the whole thing feel even more official, like the kind of document you sign and then forget until it matters. "Sign it, then move," she told me. I stared at the signature line. It wasn't a consent form. It wasn't a waiver. It was something worse. It was the department putting a rule in writing and making sure my name was attached to it. If I broke it, it wouldn't be a misunderstanding. It would be on me. I signed anyway. I wrote Jackson Reed in block letters, then my badge number, then the time. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me. What I felt wasn't panic. It was that tight, clean pressure you get before you walk into something you can't unsee. Marla took the page back, checked it, then clipped it to the front of the working packet. She didn't smile. She didn't soften. The mission stayed simple. I would ride out with Noah Brandt, confirm the location from the hiker's clip, mark the safest route in and out, and take wide photos that showed context. Then I would come straight back. No extra searching, no hero moves, no private investigations. If anything went sideways, I didn't turn it into radio chatter. I used a landline when I could, and I brought the problem back to the building where other people existed. Marla closed the cold case binder and slid it back into the cabinet like she was putting a lid on something that didn't like being exposed. Then she looked at me, steady and tired and completely in control of her face. I understood what she was really telling me. There was a right way to go into those woods, and there were 100 wrong ways. The addendum wasn't there to make me feel safe. It was there because somebody had already tried doing it the normal way, and the normal way had gotten someone swallowed. I left records with the working packet clipped tight under my arm, and the pen mark of my own name still fresh in my head. The station felt louder after that room, like the normal sounds were trying to convince me nothing had changed. Phones ringing. A deputy laughing at something by the coffee pot, boots on tile, the graveyard shift rolling in with tired faces and fast jokes. I didn't stop to explain anything. Marla hadn't given me the kind of assignment you talk about in the hallway. I went straight to my locker, opened it, and started pulling what I'd need without thinking too hard about why I was choosing it. Gloves first. Nitrile and a thicker pair that could handle brush and cold metal. Evidence bags in 2 sizes, the clear ones with white label strips and the red seal line. A roll of marking tape. Not crime scene ribbon, just the plain bright stuff we used for quick reference in the field. Spare batteries for my flashlight and radio. A small field notebook that fit in a cargo pocket. A couple of pens, because pens always die when you need them. I grabbed my body cam too, more out of habit than anything, then paused, then took it anyway. If this turned into paperwork later, I wanted my own timeline. In the equipment cabinet, I checked out the department camera with the wide lens. We didn't always use it. Most of the time phones were enough, but Marla had said wide photos, context shots, no close-ups, and I wasn't going to improvise on the first line of the addendum. I signed the checkout sheet, clipped the camera strap tight, and ran my thumb along the lens cap like a nervous tick. By the time I hit the lot, the sky was fully dark. The air had that damp spring bite to it, the kind that sits on your skin and makes everything smell like wet asphalt. The station lights threw hard shadows across the parked units. My patrol car looked normal, clean enough, familiar. I stared at it for a second longer than I needed to, like I was reminding myself what normal was supposed to look like. Noah Brandt was waiting near the far end of the lot by a county truck that didn't have a light bar, just a utility rack and a muddy bed liner. He wasn't in uniform. Work boots, dark jacket, ball cap pulled low. He had a folded map in one hand and a travel mug in the other. He didn't look like someone who worked out of an office. He looked like someone who spent more time on dirt than pavement. He watched me walk up without moving, not unfriendly, just assessing, like he was deciding whether I'd be a problem. "Your read?" Noah asked, eyeing my uniform. His voice was calm, almost flat. He wasn't trying to be intimidating. That was just how he spoke. "Jackson Reed," I said, and held up the clipboard. The addendum was clipped right on top where it couldn't be missed. I didn't hide it. I didn't play tough. I let it be what it was. A piece of paper that mattered more than it should. Noah's eyes went straight to the signature line. I saw the small shift in his face when he noticed the date and time. Not surprise, more like relief that someone had done the first thing correctly. "You signed the addendum?" he insisted. He said it like a requirement, not a question. Like if I said no, he'd turn around, get in his truck, and go home. "Yeah," I said. Noah nodded once. He didn't ask what it said. He already knew. That alone told me it wasn't a random sheet Marla had cooked up. This had history. Weight. He stepped closer and lowered his voice, not because anyone was listening, but because that's how you talk when you're laying down rules you don't want repeated. "Then don't freelance," Noah said quietly. The words weren't dramatic. They were practical. I'd heard versions of them from training officers and supervisors. Don't go off script. Don't chase your curiosity. Don't turn one job into three. But the way he said it made it feel like freelancing didn't just get you written up. It got you erased. I glanced at the map in his hand. Forest Service roads, spurs, old logging cuts, the kind of terrain that looks simple until you're inside it, and every tree line starts looking like the next. "Copy. You lead," I told him. Noah took that without comment. He turned and tossed his mug into the cup holder of the county truck, then unfolded the map on the hood under the lot light. He traced a route with a finger, not bothering with street names because out there the names didn't matter. What mattered was which gate was locked, which washout was passable, which spur would swallow a vehicle and keep it. He pointed at a section of the map and tapped twice. That was our entry road. Another tap farther in. That was where we'd park and go on foot. He didn't say the unit's location out loud. He kept his finger on it like speaking it would make it move. I checked my gear one more time. Gloves accessible, bags accessible, tape in my jacket pocket, notebook in my thigh pocket, camera strap secure, radio on, volume not too high. I didn't want it screaming in the woods. I wanted it functional. Dispatch called while we were still under the lot lights, like it was any other night. Dana's voice came through my speaker, clean and calm, the same tone she used whether she was sending someone to a barking dog complaint or a fatal wreck. Routine was part of how she kept everyone steady. We did a quick check-in, nothing special, just confirming we were rolling. I didn't mention the clip. I didn't mention the cold case. I didn't mention the addendum. If you say those things over the air, someone else hears them, and then you're managing a rumor while you're trying to manage a job. Noah climbed into the passenger seat of my unit without asking. He moved like he'd done it before, like the interior of a patrol car didn't impress him. He set the folded map on his knee and angled the dome light down low so it wouldn't glare on the windshield. I pulled out of the lot and headed toward the edge of town, streetlights thinning, buildings dropping away. Noah called the turns early and quiet, not like a backseat driver, more like a navigator who wanted to minimize time spent on each decision. Noah called the turns early and quiet, telling me to keep it steady and not rush. The farther we got from pavement, the less the world felt like the county I'd been learning. Houses spaced out, porches dark, the last gas station shutting its lights off. Then the road narrowed and the trees started to stack up on both sides like walls. My headlights caught rain sheen on leaves. The forest looked black and wet and endless. Noah adjusted the map with one hand and kept his other resting on his thigh, relaxed but ready. He didn't talk. He didn't fill the silence with stories. He didn't warn me about ghosts or legends or local rumors. He'd already done his warning. Don't freelance. Do what you signed. And as we turned onto the first forest road, gravel popping under my tires, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel harder than I needed to. I loosened my hands. I forced a slow breath. I told myself it was just a location check. Then, I thought about that handprint on the inside of the windshield and how the clip had ended right there, like the person filming couldn't make themselves take one more step closer. The paved road didn't end all at once. It frayed. Streetlights became fewer. The shoulder got narrow. The lines on the road faded like they'd been erased by rain. Then the asphalt turned to gravel with a hard little crunch that went up through the steering column and into my wrists. I eased off the gas without thinking. Gravel roads punish people who drive like they're still on pavement. The forest closed in fast. On both sides, trees leaned over the road like they wanted to meet in the middle. The air was cooler out here, damp enough that everything smelled like wet leaves and old wood. My headlights caught mist in the low spots, not fog, just thin moisture hanging in the dark. It wasn't spooky. It was normal for this county. That was almost worse, because it meant the woods could feel ordinary right up until they didn't. The road got rough within a mile. Potholes punched at the tires. The truck bucked and dipped, suspension groaning. Branches scraped the side panels with a sound like fingernails dragging slow across metal. I kept both hands on the wheel and let the pace stay boring. Fast out here was how you end up on your side with nobody finding you until morning. Noah sat quiet, map on his knee, head tilted slightly as he watched the tree line and the cut banks. He wasn't sightseeing. He was reading the land, the way some people read faces. He pointed once without looking at me, just a small gesture to a fork in the road. I took the left and didn't ask why. If he was wrong, I could blame him later. If he was right, we'd keep moving. I glanced at my phone on the console out of habit. 1 bar, then none. The screen didn't change, just the little icon dropping to a blank space. I clicked it awake and watched it search, then give up. It wasn't a problem. I didn't need my phone, but seeing it die made the woods feel farther away from everything else. Cell service is dead, I said. It stays dead, Noah replied. He didn't look at me when he said it. He just kept his eyes forward, like the road ahead was the only thing worth acknowledging. The radio started picking up a faint static, the kind that comes and goes in waves, not a full dead zone, just interference. It wasn't unusual either. We had valleys that ate signals, ridges that bounced them back, stretches where you had to hold the mic closer and speak slower. But I noticed it more because I'd already seen the clip, and because I'd already signed a piece of paper that implied the radio could become a problem. I kept the volume at a reasonable level, loud enough to catch my call sign, quiet enough that it didn't feel like a third person in the car. The last thing I wanted was noise rattling in my head while I tried to stay sharp. Noah unfolded the map again under the dim dome light. He tapped a line, then traced it with a finger that had a little dirt under the nail. The spur road didn't have a real name. It was a thin line on paper and a rough cut through trees in real life. The kind of place hikers wouldn't stumble into by accident. The kind of place you went on purpose. I started marking the route without making a show of it. A strip of tape on a low branch near a bend where the road split. A note in my field book, shallow washout, passable, keep right. A landmark. A fallen cedar with its root ball torn up, like someone had peeled the earth open. Simple things. Not because I thought I'd get lost in 5 minutes, but because good habits keep you alive on nights when your brain starts skipping steps. The truck bounced harder as we climbed. Gravel turned to dirt, and then back to gravel. There were shallow ruts from old rain, and once the tires slid in loose rock and my stomach tightened until I corrected. The forest didn't care if I was new here. It didn't care if I was careful. It would take what it could take. Noah finally spoke again, not to fill silence but to anchor us to the plan. We park up ahead and go on foot. He didn't mention the car. He didn't say, the patrol unit. He didn't say, that sheriff car. He used the same phrase he'd used with Marla's packet, like it was a formal title. The unit. Like naming it anything else would make it real in a way neither of us wanted. We passed a spot where the road dipped and the air changed, colder and heavier. The static on the radio thickened for a few seconds, then cleared. The truck's headlights caught a ribbon of mist sliding between trunks, and it looked almost like smoke until it wasn't. Then, for one quick moment, the damp forest smell shifted. It was subtle, and if I'd been talking or thinking about something else, I might have missed it. A clean, sharp metal smell cut through the wet like the inside of a new toolbox. Not copper, not blood, not that penny taste people describe. Just clean metal, the way a gun safe smells when you open it. It was there, and then it wasn't, swallowed back into leaves and soil like it had never happened. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make it a thing. I didn't want Noah to look at me and see it on my face. But my throat tightened anyway, and I had to swallow once to make it loosen. The road leveled out and Noah pointed to a widened patch ahead where the trees pulled back just enough for one vehicle to tuck in. It wasn't a parking lot. It was a scar on the edge of the forest where other tires had sat before. I slowed and rolled into it, headlights sweeping across brush. I killed the engine, listened to the sudden quiet, then turned it back on. Habit. I didn't like sitting in darkness with no noise, but the engine noise also felt loud out here, like it announced us to everything in the timber. I shut it off again and let the quiet settle. My radio crackled, static first, then Dana's voice cutting through clean. She didn't sound worried. She sounded like she was checking off a box. "Dispatch, we're still moving," I said into the radio, trying to stay calm. "Copy." Dana answered. That was it. No extra questions, no tone change, just routine. I put the radio back on my belt and looked at Noah. He was already scanning the tree line, eyes adjusting to dark. He didn't ask if I was good. He didn't ask if I wanted to turn back. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a small flashlight and an old compass, like he'd been carrying them for years. Practical, not theatrical. I grabbed my camera, my notebook, and the roll of tape. I checked my gloves again, flexed my fingers inside them, and stepped out into air that felt colder the second it hit my face. The forest swallowed the sound of the truck door when I closed it. Even the gravel under my boots sounded muted. Noah took one step forward, then paused like he was listening for something. Not voices, not bells. Just the way you listen when you know you're not alone, even if you can't prove it. He didn't say it. He didn't have to. We started walking. We didn't hike far. That was the first thing that bothered me. In my head, deep in the woods, meant miles. It meant sweat and losing daylight and the kind of commitment you can't undo fast. This was different. This was a short walk off a rough road, the kind of place you could hit on a lunch break if you knew exactly where to turn. Noah led with a steady pace, flashlight pointed low, beam cutting across roots and slick leaves. I kept my light low too, not because I was trying to follow a rule yet, just because it made sense. High beams in the woods blind you. They turn everything beyond your light into a wall. The spur narrowed into a faint path, more tire track than trail. It dropped slightly, and the air got wetter, like we'd stepped into a shallow bowl. The trees crowded in closer, and the underbrush thickened. My boots sank a little with each step. Mud, soft and black, the kind that holds prints too well. Noah stopped at a bend and held up one hand. I froze where I was. For a second, I thought he'd heard something. Then he angled his flashlight through the trees, and I saw it. The unit sat exactly like the clip. Same tilt, same ditch, same stubborn, ugly stillness. It looked worse in person. Rust wasn't just on the surface. It had eaten into the seams. The front bumper was half buried, caked with mud, like the ditch had been filling and emptying for years. Moss grew in thick mats along the rocker panels. Vines wrapped the grill and climbed the door like a slow hand. The light bar on top was fogged over, plastic yellowed and cloudy. One corner of it sagged a little, like the mount had loosened. The sheriff lettering on the door was there, but faint, flaking at the edges. The star badge decal had bubbled and peeled. The county unit number on the rear quarter panel was hard to make out unless the light hit it right. Still, it was enough to tell what it had been, enough to make my stomach drop. I moved one step closer without thinking and stopped myself. The addendum flashed in my mind like a stop sign. 3 steps, no handles, no trunk, no standing behind it. The list didn't feel like paper out here. It felt like a fence. Noah stayed where he was, shoulders squared, flashlight held steady. He didn't look at the unit the way people look at a car. He looked at it the way you look at a hole in the ground you didn't see until your foot was almost over it. My light drifted to the windshield. It was dirt-streaked on the outside, old rain marks and sap drips. Then my beam caught the inside surface and my skin went tight. The handprint was still there. Palm flat against the glass, fingers spread, clear enough that I could see the ridges. It wasn't a muddy print. It wasn't grime. It was clean oil, like someone had pressed their hand and held it. The position was wrong for a prank. Too high to be a kid, too centered to be random. It sat where the driver would reach if they were leaning forward in a hurry. I stared at it longer than I meant to, like if I stared hard enough, I'd see the person who'd made it. Nothing moved. The unit didn't creak. The vines didn't sway. The woods around it were still. Even the insects felt quieter than they should have been. My instinct snapped in like a switch. Call it in. Plate and unit number. Confirm location. Start the chain. The way my training officer had drilled it into me years ago. Don't stand in front of a problem alone. Put it on the air. Make it real. Make it shared. My hand went to my mic before I could stop it. I didn't even grab it fully. Just touched it, thumb finding the edge like muscle memory. Jesus, I said under my breath. Noah's head turned a fraction. He didn't look surprised. He looked like he'd been waiting for that exact moment. Don't, Noah snapped. The word hit me sharper than it should have. Not loud, not angry, just immediate, like he was pulling my hand back without touching me. I'm calling it in, I said, already reaching for my mic. That was the part of me that hated the idea of standing in silent woods with a county unit in front of me and no one else knowing what I was seeing. The part that believed the radio made you safer. The part that wanted the comfort of procedure. Noah stepped closer, not toward the unit, toward me. He kept his body between my hand and my mouth like he could block the sound from getting out. Not while you can see it, Noah told me. His voice dropped on the last word, like he was trying to get through to me without making it bigger than it already was, like he didn't want the woods to hear. I forced my hand off the mic. It took more effort than it should have. My thumb hovered for a second, then I clipped it back to my vest and let my arm fall. The silence that followed felt heavy. Not supernatural, not magic. just the absence of the one thing I always used to anchor myself, a call sign in my ear, a dispatcher answering back, a normal voice saying copy. Noah kept his eyes on the unit, not on me. His flashlight beam stayed low, pointed at the ground in front of the ditch, not at the windshield. He didn't want to light up that handprint again. He didn't want to give it attention. I took a slow breath and made myself do the boring steps. I pulled out my notebook and wrote the time. I wrote our approximate location based on the last known marker. I didn't write plate numbers. I didn't write unit numbers. I wrote county unit and left it there. Then I lifted the camera and took a wide shot, exactly like Marla had said. The entire ditch, the angle of the unit, the tree line behind it, the muddy track we'd walked in on. I took another wide shot from the side, careful to stay out of that invisible radius. I didn't zoom. I didn't step forward to get better detail. I kept it boring. It was hard to explain how unnatural that felt. Every part of my job pushed me toward details, toward confirmation, toward naming the thing so it could be filed and handled and put away. The addendum was asking me to do the opposite, to stand there, see it, and keep my mouth shut about what it was until I was back inside a building with a landline and witnesses. I kept my eyes off the mirror. I kept my body out of the center line behind the rear bumper. I kept my feet planted where they were, even though my brain kept whispering that one step closer wouldn't matter. Noah shifted his weight slightly, like he was preparing for something. He didn't say anything else. He didn't repeat the rule. He'd already done his part. And the longer we stood there with that rusted unit in front of us, the more the handprint started to feel like it wasn't a sign of the past. It felt like a warning that someone had been inside recently, or worse, that someone still was. I kept working the scene the only way the addendum allowed. Wide shots, context, the kind of photos that look useless until you need to prove where something was and what the ground looked like around it. I took one from the path, one from a few yards left, one from a few yards right. I made sure the tree line and the ditch edge were in frame so we could find the same spot again in daylight. I noted the time again in my book, because time is the one thing you can anchor when everything else starts slipping. Noah stayed off to my right, never lining up with the rear bumper. He held his flashlight low, beam angled at the ground and the lower panels, not the windshield. When he looked at the cabin, he did it from the side, like he didn't want his eyes to meet that rear-view mirror straight on. The addendum didn't say why. It didn't have to. The way Noah avoided it made the reason feel obvious. The unit looked dead. It looked like it had been sitting there long enough to become part of the ditch. But the handprint said otherwise. The more I looked at it, the more my skin wanted to tighten. Not fear exactly. More like my body didn't like being watched. I forced myself to focus on small, normal things, mud patterns, tire tracks, whether the ditch had been recently disturbed. There were prints near the front end, but they were old, softened by rain. I couldn't tell if they were from hikers, hunters, or search teams from years ago. The mud wasn't fresh enough to hold a story. Noah shifted his stance, just a slow repositioning, and his light swept across the rear quarter panel. Something glinted under the grime. A piece of metal caught the beam for half a second and then vanished when he moved the angle. It could have been anything. A bolt, a bracket, a bit of trash caught in vines. He didn't step closer. He just watched it, measuring. I leaned slightly to see what he was seeing, then stopped myself. If I started chasing reflections, I'd end up walking right into the same impulse the addendum was trying to block. We stood there like that for another minute. No words, no radio, just breathing in wet forest and the quiet weight of a county unit that shouldn't exist. Then the sound came. A single metallic clunk from the back end of the vehicle. Not loud, not dramatic. More like something small shifting against metal, like keys sliding in a cup holder, like cuffs bumping the inside of a trunk. I froze. My flashlight beam jerked, then steadied. Noah's head snapped toward the rear. The sound wasn't the wood settling. It wasn't a branch dropping. It had that hollow, contained ring that comes from inside a vehicle. I didn't want to make it bigger than it was, but my mouth moved anyway. "You heard that," I said. "Yeah," Noah muttered. His voice sounded tighter than before, still controlled but different. The way a professional voice changes when the situation starts behaving like it's aware of you. I stared at the unit's rear. The trunk line was crusted with rust. The seams looked swollen, like the metal had expanded over time. It didn't look like something you could open even if you wanted to. That was the only comforting thought in my head. And it didn't last. Because the clunk wasn't about the trunk being open. It was about the possibility that something inside had moved. And if something inside could move, then the handprint wasn't a memory. Noah took half a step forward, then stopped. He didn't cross the line yet. He was thinking. I could see it in the way he held his shoulders, the way his light steadied on one point as if he was trying to lock reality down. This was his world more than mine. Not the patrol part, the woods part, the part where you decide whether a sound means danger or just old junk shifting. He'd probably heard 1,000 noises out here and ignored 999 of them. He wasn't ignoring this one. It hit me then what the clunk could be, beyond the obvious. If the missing deputy's gear had been inside that unit when it went down, there might still be department property in there. Badge, cuffs, keys, radio mount, any of it. Items that could be used as proof for the file, items that could settle rumors, or at least give the county something tangible. That's what a supervisor would want. That's what a cold case tries to spit back out, if it ever does. And that was exactly what gets people hurt. I'd seen it in normal cases. The urge to reach for the one piece of evidence that makes the story clean. The urge to turn uncertainty into a reportable fact. Noah's instincts were kicking in for a reason that made sense. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't bravado. It was a professional pull, the same one that made me reach for my mic. The job is built on closing loops. Finding things, naming them, bagging them, bringing them back. I lifted my hand slightly, not to grab him, just to stop him with the motion. 3 steps, I warned him. Noah didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on the rear corner of the unit, where the metal glint had flashed. "I know," he said, and still moved. He didn't rush. He didn't charge the vehicle like a rookie. He took one careful step, then another, angling in from the side the way the addendum suggested. He kept himself off-center, avoiding the straight line behind the bumper. His light stayed low, aimed at the ground near the rear wheel, as if he could see the boundary by watching the dirt. I wanted to tell him to stop again. I wanted to say we could leave and come back in daylight with more people, with a winch, with an entire team and a plan. But I didn't say it. I could feel how close we were to turning this into a different kind of situation. If I started arguing, if I raised my voice, if I made it emotional, we'd both lose the calm that was keeping us disciplined. Noah took one more step. His boot sank slightly into the mud. He leaned forward, just a fraction, and his flashlight beam slid up along the rear panel. The clunk didn't repeat. The woods didn't move. Everything held still, like it was waiting to see what he'd do next. Noah leaned in a little more, just enough that his shoulders crossed into the space the addendum had warned about. It didn't look dramatic. It didn't look like a mistake. It looked like a man doing a careful professional approach, trying to get eyes on something without touching anything. He kept his angle. He kept his light low. He never lined up with the rear bumper. He did everything right, except for the distance. That was the part that made my stomach go tight. The rules weren't about being sloppy. They were about a boundary you couldn't see. I stood where I was and tried to keep my breathing even. My camera hung against my chest, swinging slightly when I shifted my weight. I forced it still. I didn't want movement. Movement makes you feel like you're in control when you're not. Noah took another step, maybe a half step. Hard to tell in the dark. His boots were nearly the same color as the mud. He paused, and his flashlight beam climbed the rear quarter panel again, slow and deliberate, like he was searching for that glint. I watched the beam move, watched it slide over rust and grime, then catch the edge of something metal near the back end. The light hit it just right, and a small reflection flashed. Noah's head tilted, and he leaned forward a fraction more. In that exact moment, my training won the argument in my head. Document, timestamp. You can't write what you don't lock down. If this turned into a missing liaison report, the first thing anyone would ask was when and where. I dropped my eyes to my notebook. 1 beat. That's all it took. I wrote the time. I wrote the coordinates from my GPS unit, careful with the numbers. My pen dragged slightly because the paper was damp. I pressed harder. When I looked up again, Noah wasn't there. At first, my brain refused it. It tried to fill in a normal answer. He stepped back behind a tree. He moved to the other side. He crouched down. He's right there, just out of your light. But my flashlight beam was steady on the same patch of mud, and that patch was empty. I shifted my light left, then right. The ditch, the rear bumper, the vines, the dark line of the trunk seam. Nothing. The unit sat exactly the same. The handprint on the windshield was still visible when my light caught it. The woods were still, no footsteps retreating, no brush breaking, no grunt of a man losing footing. Just absence. "Noah?" I said, and my voice didn't sound like mine. It came out thinner than I expected, like my throat had tightened without my permission. I took 1 step forward and stopped. The addendum screamed in my head. 3 steps. No go space. Don't crowd it. Don't fix it with instincts. I swung my beam down to the ground where Noah had been standing. His boot prints were there in the mud, crisp and fresh. 2 deep treads, right pattern, right weight. They pointed toward the rear of the unit. I followed them with my light like I was tracking a trail, letting the mud tell me what happened. The prints went forward another step, then another. Then they stopped. Not faded, not smeared, not softened. They stopped like someone had lifted him straight up. The last clear print sat less than a foot from the rear bumper, toe angled slightly inward, as if he'd been about to pivot. There was no turnout print, no drag line, no scuff mark, no step away, no set of prints continuing into the brush. The mud around the last print was undisturbed, except for a faint indentation like a heel had settled. It was too clean, too neat, like the ground had been edited. I lifted my light higher, searching for any sign of him in the trees. A reflective strip, a sleeve, the edge of his cap. Nothing. The darkness beyond my light felt thicker than it should have, like it was absorbing the beam instead of bouncing it back. I barked his name again, harder, like volume could pull him back into place. "Noah!" I barked louder. My voice hit the trees and died. No echo, no answer, not even the small sound of someone shifting to respond. My hand moved toward my mic again. Muscle memory. Call it in. Give dispatch the unit location, the plate, the exact spot so people can respond. But the addendum sat on top of my clipboard in my own handwriting and my own signature. And Rule 1 was clear. No identifiers while you can see it. I stared at the unit, at the faded letters on the door, and felt my mouth go dry. My brain kept trying to argue that this was the time to break the rule. This was an emergency. This was a missing person. This was not the moment for paperwork. But every time I pictured myself keying the radio and saying the plate number, the scene in my head didn't end with help arriving. It ended with me standing where Noah had stood, and then being gone, and the mud showing one more set of prints that stopped too clean. A short burst of squelch snapped from somewhere in the dark, low and close. It wasn't my radio. Mine was clipped to my belt, quiet. This was a different sound, like a mic opened and closed once, fast, as if someone pressed the talk button by accident. Then silence again. Noah's radio. If he had one. One tiny noise that said he had been here a second ago. One tiny noise that died like someone had crushed it in a fist. My chest felt too tight. I realized I hadn't taken a full breath in several seconds. I forced air in, and it stung like cold water. The forest smelled damp again, normal again, and that made everything worse. It was like the world refused to acknowledge what had just happened. I looked at my notebook, at the numbers I'd written. Time, coordinates, proof that I wasn't inventing this, proof that I was still thinking like a deputy even while my brain was trying to slide into panic. I muttered to myself like a lifeline, words I didn't mean to say out loud. Okay, I muttered, forcing air back into my lungs. I stood there and made myself do the next right thing. Not the heroic thing, not the instinct thing. The next right thing. I stepped back, slow, retracing my own prints. I kept my flashlight beam on the ground, not the unit, not the windshield. I didn't want to look at the handprint again. I didn't want to give that scene any more attention than I already had. My hand hovered near my mic, but I didn't key it. I didn't say plates. I didn't say unit numbers. I didn't say names. I swallowed hard and felt how loud it sounded inside my skull. I took another step back, then another, until the ditch felt a little farther away and my body stopped screaming that I was standing on the edge of something. The silence held. Noah didn't reappear. Nothing climbed out of the car. No figure moved behind the glass. No branch snapped behind me. It was just the unit in the ditch, the handprint inside the windshield, and a set of boot prints that ended in clean mud like the ground had decided he was finished. I didn't say I was sorry. I didn't say I'd come back. I didn't say anything that sounded like a promise. I'm leaving, I told the empty trees. Then I turned my back on the unit without looking at the mirror, and I walked. I didn't run. Running was how you broke your own rules. Running was how you stopped paying attention to where your feet landed and ended up on your face in the dark. Running was how you turned fear into noise and noise into mistakes. I kept my steps measured, heel to toe, following my own prints the way you follow a line on a map. My flashlight stayed low, beam aimed at the ground in front of me. Not because I was scared of seeing something, but because wide scanning makes you miss details. If I swept the trees, I'd start seeing shapes that weren't there. If I kept the light on the path, I'd keep moving. Behind me, the unit stayed silent. No doors creaked, no trunk popped, no engine ticked cooling down. The woods didn't offer me an explanation. It didn't even offer me a sound. I counted my breaths to keep my hands steady. In for 4, out for 4. The kind of stupid little mental trick you learn in training and swear you'll never need. It worked anyway. I reached the bend where Noah had first stopped and raised his hand. I recognized the shape of the tree trunk on the left and the root that ran across the path like a low step. My tape mark should have been there, bright and simple. A strip wrapped around a branch at shoulder height. The branch was bare. I stopped without meaning to. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back toward the unit. I just stared at the empty branch and felt my stomach drop a second time. I know tape falls off. Rain and wind and animals can pull it loose. But I'd put it on less than half an hour ago. The adhesive should have been strong. The bright strip should have screamed at my light. I moved my beam to the side and found the tape 10 feet farther down, wrapped around a different branch, lower than where I would have placed it. It wasn't ripped. It wasn't dangling. It was neatly in place, as if I'd done it that way on purpose. I knelt, kept my light tight on it, and checked the wrap. It was the same roll, same tier pattern, same width. It had my fingerprints on it, sure, but everything out here would. The point wasn't whether it was mine. The point was that I didn't remember putting it there. I stood back up slowly and forced myself to keep moving. A few minutes later, the next landmark I'd noted felt too close. The fallen cedar with the torn root ball showed up sooner than it should have. I'd walked a longer stretch to get there on the way in. I was certain of it. That certainty started to crack under my feet, and I hated it. I didn't let myself argue with my memory. I didn't let myself stand in the woods and try to calculate distance while my brain spiraled. I did what the addendum was teaching me without saying it out loud. I accepted that the route was unstable and treated it like a hazard. I kept my light steady. No flashing, no strobe, no quick movements. I didn't want to turn my head into a metronome for panic. The radio hissed once, a small burst of static like it was clearing its throat. My fingers twitched toward the mic out of habit. I stopped them. I didn't want to fill the air with anything unnecessary until I had a plan. I walked another 50 yards and reached the wider stretch where the spur met the forest road. I could see the dull shape of my patrol unit through the trees, parked where we'd left it. The sight of it hit me in the chest like relief I hadn't earned. I crossed that last bit of ground fast, not running, but close. I wanted to be in the open, under the sky, where the forest wasn't inches from my shoulders. Once I was at the truck, I did the quickest scan of the area I could manage. No movement, no headlamp glow, no silhouette. Noah hadn't come back on his own. I opened the driver's door, got in, and shut it like it could keep the woods out. My hands were steady on the steering wheel for about 2 seconds. Then they started shaking, small tremors I couldn't control. Not full panic, just adrenaline, finally realizing it didn't have a job anymore. I forced myself to breathe again. In for 4. Out for 4. The unit in the ditch was still in view in my mind, the boot prints ending clean, the handprint inside the windshield, the way Noah had disappeared like a light turning off. I looked at the radio clipped to my vest, and then at the handheld charger dock on the dash. I didn't care about charging. I cared about hearing Dana's real voice, something normal, something that didn't feel like the woods. I keyed the mic, careful with my words, careful not to say anything that would make the addendum relevant in the wrong way. The unit was no longer in sight. We were out of that pocket. That mattered. "Dispatch, I need Dana," I said into the radio, trying to stay steady. There was a beat of static. Then her voice came through, calm in the way only dispatchers can be when someone else's night is falling apart. "This is Dana. Go ahead," she replied. I swallowed once. My mouth tasted like old coffee and dry air. I kept my voice level, the way you do when you're trying not to infect the other end of the line with your fear. "My liaison is missing," I said. Dana didn't gasp. She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't do any of the emotional things people do when they don't know what to do. She went straight into procedure because procedure is what keeps the rest of the system from shaking loose. "Come back in, now," Dana told me. Her tone left no room for questions. "Return to the station, get inside, get eyes on you, get you on a landline, start the formal chain." "Copy," I said, but I didn't add anything else. I didn't say Noah's name over the air. I didn't say where the unit was. I didn't say what I'd seen. I started the engine. The headlights flared across wet brush. The radio crackled once more, and then went quiet like it was listening. As I backed out, my tape marks flashed in my memory. One missing, one moved. The route thinning out behind me like a bad recording. Like the woods had decided to rewind and cut out the part where Noah existed. I kept the truck slow. I didn't want to skid. I didn't want to crash. I didn't want to give the night another way to take me. The forest road bounced under my tires, and branches scraped the panels again, the same sound as before. It should have felt familiar. It didn't. All it felt like was distance. Distance from the unit. Distance from the ditch. Distance from a set of boot prints that ended too clean. And a growing certainty that the rules on that addendum weren't precautions. They were the only reason I was still in the driver's seat. By the time I pulled into the lot, my hands were steady again, but my stomach wasn't. Dana saw me through the dispatch glass as soon as I came in. She didn't wave or smile. She just watched, headset on, and reached for her desk phone. I didn't hear what she said, but I saw her glance toward records. That told me Marla was already waiting. Marla was in the corridor like she'd been there the whole time. Same uniform, same posture, face set in that calm that isn't comfort, it's control. She looked at my clipboard, the addendum clipped on top, then at my eyes. "Phone, not radio," Marla ordered. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She walked me into records and shut the door. The room was cold and quiet. Shelves of binders and case boxes lined up like order could hold the world together. Marla went straight to the landline, dialed an internal number, and put it on speaker. Dana answered. Marla didn't explain anything beyond that I was giving a field report. Then she looked at me and waited. I gave it the way I'd been trained: time, location, conditions, actions. I told them when Noah and I left, when we hit gravel, where we parked, and how far we walked. I described the spur as wet timber and mud that held prints. No wind, no other hikers. I said we located the unit exactly as shown in the clip: tipped in the ditch, rusted through seams, moss on the lower panels, vines threaded through the grill, light bar cloudy. I described the handprint on the inside of the windshield, clear enough to show finger ridges, positioned at driver height like someone braced forward. I said it looked recent. I told them I took wide photos only, no close approach, and I logged time and coordinates. I explained Noah's positioning: side angle, avoided the mirror line, avoided standing centered behind the rear bumper. Then I told them about the sound. One contained metallic clunk from the back end, like keys or cuffs shifting inside a closed space. Noah moved closer to check it, slow and deliberate, and I warned him about the 3-step radius. He acknowledged it and moved anyway. He didn't rush. He didn't touch anything. He took a step, then another. I looked down to write the time and the GPS coordinates, 1 beat, and when I looked up, he was gone. Marla didn't react like someone hearing a campfire story. She went straight to what could be verified. I described Noah's boot prints in the mud, clear treads leading toward the rear bumper, then stopping clean. No turnout print, no drag, no scuff, no path into brush, just an abrupt end. No scream, no struggle, no dropped gear. I told them I heard one short burst of squelch that wasn't mine, then nothing, and I believed it came from Noah's radio. I told them I backed out without running and returned to the truck. Dana asked for the coordinates and last known point. I confirmed I had them written down. I could hear her typing, steady. The part that hit me wasn't her voice. It was how normal it sounded, like she could file missing the same way she filed a fender bender. That's when I understood this wasn't new to the system. Maybe not to her. Maybe not to the file sitting behind her eyes. I kept my hands flat on the table so she wouldn't see them shake again. Marla's focus dropped to the addendum like it was a medical chart. "Did you call the plate?" she asked, clipped. "No," I said. She nodded once and kept going through the rules without raising her voice. The questions were short: identifiers, unit number, flashing lights, behind the bumper, handles, trunk. Each answer was no. Then she hit the line that mattered most. "Did he step inside your 3-step radius?" Marla pressed. My mouth was dry. I swallowed once and kept it factual. "He did," I admitted. Marla wrote something on a pad, then told Dana to log Noah as missing and start the notification chain. She ordered a perimeter hold until daylight, no one re-entering that spur alone, no freelance searches in the dark. At first light, she said, Hank's recovery team would go in, and we'd treat the location as controlled access. Then she slid a blank statement form across the table and pointed at it. "Write it clean, minute by minute, times, distances, no guesses, no theories." I sat down and started building a timeline while the details were still sharp enough to hurt. I wrote the time of the clunk. I wrote the time Noah stepped in. I wrote the time I looked down. I wrote the time I looked up. I wrote the coordinates in full and underlined them once, because if the woods could erase a person, the least I could do was make sure the paper didn't erase him too. I didn't go home after my statement. Marla didn't order me to stay, but she didn't release me either. She put me in the break room with a paper cup of coffee and a chair facing the hallway, like she wanted me contained where cameras and witnesses existed. I tried to sleep and couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the last print in the mud and the clean stop after it, like the ground had cut the footage. By morning, the station had that early shift rhythm, doors opening, radios chirping, people acting normal because they had to. Hank Lively arrived with the recovery rig a little after sunrise. Heavy winch, straps coiled, tool drawers locked. Hank wasn't a cop, and that was why Marla used him. He didn't chase stories. He did jobs. Marla briefed him outside records. She kept it procedural, like she was explaining a roadside tow. She handed him my coordinates, the route Noah had used, and the safety boundaries from the addendum. She didn't add commentary. She didn't need to. She told me to stay in the building, not as punishment, as control. Witnesses don't go back in and complicate a timeline. I didn't argue. I didn't want the unit in my eyes again, and I didn't want the woods doing anything else to my memory. Hank took 2 deputies with him for support. I watched them roll out, and I kept staring at the empty spot in the lot after they left. Dinah logged their departure in dispatch, calm as always. Hours dragged. I rewrote my timeline twice, tightening it, stripping anything that sounded like feeling. I drank water. I didn't eat. The station sound stayed normal, which made my skin feel thin, like I was the only person carrying something heavy. Late morning, the recovery rig came back. I knew it was wrong before Hank even stepped inside. No tow strap dangling, no extra weight squatting the rear, no fresh mud spray like he'd just winched something free. The truck returned the same way it left, like it had gone out to look at an absence and come home with it. Hank walked straight to Marla with his gloves in one hand and his jaw tight. I ended up a few feet behind her without deciding to move. "There's no vehicle," Hank said, trying to stay calm. My brain rejected it because my brain still had the picture. Rust, moss, vines, sheriff lettering fading like a bruise, that handprint inside the windshield, clean enough to show ridges. "That's not possible," I said. Hank didn't argue with emotion. He didn't raise his voice. He just shook his head once. "It's not there," Hank insisted. Marla didn't ask if he went to the wrong place. She asked what he did find, and Hank answered like a man used to describing physical evidence. He found the ditch scar, flattened moss where something heavy had rested, rust flakes in the mud, vines snapped and hanging loose, ends curled as if they'd been pulled away. An indentation that matched the angle I'd described, like the ground remembered the unit even if the unit didn't want to be remembered. No frame, no wheels, no light bar, not even a broken piece of plastic. Just the negative space of it. They swept wider, looking for drag marks, tire tracks, anything that proved a human had moved it. Hank said there was nothing that fit. No winch grooves, no crushed brush from a tow, no fresh tracks leading out. If a vehicle had been extracted, the forest should have shown the effort. It didn't. Then Marla asked about Noah. Hank's answer came out flat. No gear, no radio, no flashlight, no prints that led away. Nothing that looked like a man leaving on foot. Marla thanked Hank and dismissed his team. Hank left fast. A winch can't pull on nothing. When he was gone, Marla finally looked at me and the tired part of her face showed for a second. "Then Noah isn't either," Marla said quietly. She walked back into records and I followed. Marla pulled the cold case binder, opened it, and started doing the only thing her job allowed. She built a file. Hank's recovery note went in. Dana's dispatch log went in. My statement went in. Then a missing person form for Noah, typed clean, time window tight, last known point set to the coordinates I'd written with a damp pen in the woods. She didn't make it dramatic. She made it official. Marla opened an inner folder and stopped. A page sat there that I hadn't seen the night before. Crisp, freshly printed, the same department template we used for everything that needed to look authoritative. Case number in the corner, same font, same margins, one line in the center, Noah Brandt, status missing. Below it was a signature line left blank. Marla stared at it for a long beat and then closed the folder without touching her pen. She didn't ask Dana to print it. She didn't ask who generated it. She didn't say the word impossible. She filed it like she'd learned that certain paperwork shows up on its own, and the worst thing you can do is argue with it out loud. Marla locked the binder away and wrote 2 emails I didn't read, one to command staff and one to county administration, the kind that never used the word disappear. She used terms like unlocated and pending recovery. She kept it internal, quiet, like she was trying to keep the case from becoming a headline. On the cabinet keyring, her hand paused before she turned the lock, and I realized she wasn't scared of the woods. She was scared of paperwork done wrong. That blank signature line sat in my head like a mouth waiting to be fed. It wasn't asking for a name to solve anything. It was asking for a name to make it official, to make the file accept what it had taken. I thought about my mic in the woods, my thumb hovering over it, and how close I'd been to giving the unit a plate number. I thought about how easy it would be for the next person to do it, trying to be helpful, trying to be thorough, trying to close a loop that didn't want to close. Standing there, I understood the shape of the trap. The unit wasn't just a vehicle. It was a hook. The addendum wasn't superstition. It was a set of barricades meant to keep deputies from doing what deputies are trained to do: confirm, identify, close the loop. Because the moment someone confirms the wrong thing in the wrong place, the case doesn't get solved. It gets fed.